Hey guys, how's it going? So today we are going to be getting our first day into our clay kits, which is super exciting. By the end of today, you'll have an idea about what the purpose is for all of the things in your clay kit, and we're going to get a little bit of hands-on experience kind of working with the clay. So first things first, what you'll need to get right now is you'll need to go grab your clay kit, and not necessarily required, but highly recommended is perhaps a small bowl of some water and maybe some paper towels. I'll explain why in a little bit. If you have a ruler and a spray bottle, those might also be helpful too. So clay kit, bowl of water, ruler, spray bottle, paper towels. It's okay if you don't have all of those things, just try to get what you can. All right, so first things first, we are going to start by talking about all the cool stuff that is in your clay kit. So you'll notice that your clay kit is stored in a Ziploc bag. This is gonna be the Ziploc bag that you use to store your fresh clay and keep it fresh. So once you open your bag, I'm gonna take the majority of these things out. We'll start with the clay. So the clay block that's in your bag should be soft. So it's kind of hard to describe what soft clay feels like over a computer screen, but I think I figured out a decent way to describe it. So first things first, take your clay block and press into the corner. It should be relatively easy to press into the corner. You should be able to make an indentation with a decent amount of effort, but nothing too excessive, with one finger. Okay, so if you can do that, great. That means your clay is relatively soft. If you cannot do that, that means your clay might be a little on the dry side, and I'll show you some methods in a moment to help hydrate it. The next test is the edges. So the edges are also usually meant to be a little bit soft. It might take a little bit more work to make an indentation on the edges than in the corner, and that's okay. As long as it makes an indentation with one finger, then you're good. Additionally, the sides. So the sides of your clay are probably too hard to really press any fingerprints into them. Some people like their clay to be a little bit softer, and if so, you can, again, I'll talk about it in a moment, but you can work on hydrating your clay a little bit more so it is softer. However, your clay should be soft enough so that when you really use like your knuckles, you should be able to make indentations. So with your fingerprint, you probably won't be able to make an indentation on the sides, but with your knuckles, you should be able to. If you can, your clay is good to use. So now what do you do if your clay does seem too dry, if it didn't pass any of those tests? Well, you need to work on hydrating it. So what you'll do in the future is you'll put your clay in your Ziploc bag, and you're gonna wanna add some water to this bag. There's a few ways you can do that. One way you can do that is by taking a spray bottle and spraying a bit in there. I would recommend anywhere between 3 to 10 sprays depending on how dry your clay is. If you don't have a spray bottle, then you can use your bowl of water. You can simply dip your fingers in there and splash it inside of the bag. Now, Ms. Singleton, why can't I just pour water inside the bag? Well, because clay does a poor job at soaking up puddles of water at this stage. So I recommend in some way, shape, or form, just splashing some in so it basically just kind of hydrates the air quite a lot. All right, so that's your clay. What else was in this bag? You also had one last bit on clay in your bag. Whenever you close it, you should always keep it as closed as possible. So whenever you're working in this class and you've grabbed out some clay from your clay storage, be sure to close the bag up immediately. The less air contact this clay has, the better it'll stay hydrated. That also means try to make sure that you don't have a whole lot of air in your bag. That will help prevent it from drying out. Okay, so what else was in your clay kit? You also had one of these, a little like a Dixie cup type thing, or souffle cup, so to say. So this will end up being your slip cup. Remember, slip is like a clay glue. So we'll make some of that at a later date. But what is inside of it? You should have a toothpick, which works really good for cutting details, or sorry, carving details, and a paperclip. Paperclip is used for very similar purposes, but instead of just carving in details, you can also scoop out clay to create larger indentations. All right, you should also have in your clay kit a trash bag rolled up with some things. So what is it rolled up with? It's rolled up with a spoon, which works really good for smoothing out clay, a fork, which works really good for scoring or adding texture. We'll talk about scoring at a later date when we talk about attaching clay together. And a straw, which works really good just kind of decoratively if you need to poke a hole into anything. So why did I give you guys a trash bag? Whenever you're working on a project and you plan to work on it at a later date, but you don't want it to dry out on you, you can store it in this trash bag. We'll talk about proper project storage techniques at a later date. Just know that's what this is for. Also in your clay kit, you'll find a paintbrush. It's got a long handle and more of a narrow type end to it. We'll be using this a lot for slip. You can also use your fingertip just to apply slip, but this can be a little bit neater for those of you guys that don't want to get too messy. You'll also find a black plastic knife. This is used quite literally just to cut clay off of your block. You'll come to find that just grabbing at the clay doesn't work as good as you would hope, so it's much easier just to slice some clay off. All right, and that sums up all the items that are in your clay kit. So for your assignment today, you're going to be creating 3 things. 1 is a very thin coil, 2 is a thin slab, and 3 is an appropriately thick 1/4 inch slab. So let me show you how to do each of those things. Okay, so you see here I have my clay block. I'm going to start by cutting off some clay to get started with my thin coil, which you guys will also be doing in just a moment. So when you're taking clay off this block, remember that this block is meant to last you for the remainder of the school year. So don't use too much. This is just kind of a little practice assignment. So let's see. So I just got a little wedge. This should be enough just for my thin coil. Remember, we're just practicing stuff up. Now that I've got that piece of clay out ready for my coil, I'm going to take my clay and return it to the bag so that way it does not get overly dry. It never hurts to add a little bit of water to it each time you put it away. Once your clay gets dry, it is very hard and time-consuming to rehydrate it, so it's much easier and much more in your interest to make sure it stays damp and hydrated. Okay, so next you're going to take your piece of clay, and as always, the first thing we do is knead and wedge it. That's basically just mixing up the clay, mixing up all the clay particles so that way it's soft and cohesive. Remember that kneading and wedging your clay is kind of like chewing gum in a way. So the clay usually starts out a little bit tough, but the more you kind of work with it, like I'm doing here, the more it becomes softer, just like chewing gum. You don't really want to fold it over a whole lot, so let me see. So like see there, I kind of folded it over. It's going to start creating overlapping areas and gaps where your clay isn't really connected. So try to make sure as you're working with your clay that you're keeping it together, you're not letting it kind of overlap on itself. So once you've done that for a little bit longer than I've done here, you can then start rolling your coil. First step for a coil is you're going to roll it into a ball. You can do that with your hands, you can do it on your tabletop. If you choose to do it on your tabletop, I recommend that you respect your family's house and work with clay on some sort of placemat. That could simply be paper towels, plastic wrap, whatever, but find some sort of table covering. I clearly don't need one right here though. So I've got my ball of clay. Next I'm going to start kind of putting it into like a little mini burrito shape. So I'm just kind of tapping it on the ground to get it part of the way there. On the ground, I mean on the table. Okay, so now it's kind of a little mini burrito shape, so it's starting to get there. Next, I'm going to start rolling it out. So as I'm rolling out a coil, I'm using consistent pressure. If you press too hard, you're going to get a lot of dents and divots where your coil is not even. If you press too light, it's going to take you forever. So as I keep working the coil to get thinner and thinner, I'm trying to get onto both sides of it. Eventually it might stretch out far enough where I can use both hands instead of just one. I'm also noticing that my coil is getting a little dry. You can see all that cracking. That might result in my coil accidentally breaking at some point. So every once in a while, it's okay to get a little bit of water. Again, that can be with your bowl of water, it could be with a spray bottle, whatever works best for you. And just kind of get a little water on your coil. Honestly, even if you just get a little bit of water on your hands, so your hands aren't super dry, that can help keep your coil hydrated. So the coil's getting thinner. Your assignment is to make a very thin coil. All of today's assignment in general is just really getting a feel for the clay and kind of understanding where it's going to hit its breaking point. For example, this piece got a little dry at the end and it's already kind of breaking off, which is totally fine. You can see now that I added some water to it, there's not as many cracks. They're very, very tiny cracks with the addition of maybe some little dry clay bits getting into it, and that's okay, that's much better. I'm hydrating my hands. They don't have to be soaking wet, just not dry. And keep thinning out my coil. If you feel one area starting to get really thin, then you're going to want to make sure you use lighter pressure over that area. If your coil breaks at some point, that's totally fine. That can still work for your project. This project is all about the experience, not necessarily having a phenomenal finished piece. But do challenge yourself. See how thin you can get this coil. I guarantee if your hands are dry, your coil will not get as thin as it could if your hands were hydrated. So I'm going to end mine right there. I can feel it starting to get kind of weak, but it's a consistent coil. It looks really nice. It's not too wonky. So I'm done with mine. Now, if I were to use this in a project, there's a lot of different ways I can use it. I can use coils to build upwards, or I can use coils decoratively to make decorations, such as adding this in some sort of curled format onto a side of a vase or something. So I'm going to take this coil and I'm going to put it to the side. You will not need it right away, but later, to wrap up this assignment, you will need to take a photo of all 3 pieces that you're making today. So set it to the side, hold on to it for later.